The night Jermaine ended things, I had just finished cooking. Jollof rice, fried plantain, and grilled chicken, his favorites. I had set the table with the good plates, the ones we kept for special occasions. I had even lit candles. Looking back now, I think some part of me already knew. The air in our apartment had felt different for weeks. Quieter in a way that had nothing to do with noise. He walked in, looked at the table, and then looked away. He sat down slowly, like a man carrying something too heavy to put down fast. He didn't eat. He just folded his hands and stared at the wood grain between us. "El Shadia," he said. "I can't do this anymore." I asked him what he meant. He said he had feelings for someone else. He didn't say who. He just reached across the table, gently, like he was trying to be kind about it, and slid the engagement ring off my finger. My mother's ring. The one I had resized to fit me perfectly. He placed it in his palm, closed his fist around it, and stood up. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there in the candlelight, staring at the empty space on my hand, feeling the silence press in around me like walls closing. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The candles burned all the way down that night. I never touched the food. Mirabelle was the first person I called. She picked up on the second ring, and by the time I finished talking, she was already in her car. She arrived 20 minutes later with wine, ice cream, and the kind of hug that holds you together when you feel like falling apart. That was Mirabelle. She had been my best friend since our second year at university, back when we were both broke, sharing textbooks and making noodles stretch across 4 days. She knew every version of me, the uncertain one, the ambitious one, the one who cried in bathroom stalls before big presentations. She knew which songs made me sob and which films I watched when I needed to feel brave. That night she sat with me until 3 in the morning, letting me talk in circles, never once rushing me towards sense. She said all the right things. That I was better than this. That I would be okay. That whoever he had feelings for wasn't worth the breath it took to say her name. I believed every word, because Mirabelle was the one person in my life I had never once had reason to doubt. She was my constant, my safe place, my person. I trusted her the way you trust the floor beneath your feet, completely, without thinking twice about it. I had no reason to think twice. Not yet. The first thing I did after the breakup was go back to work. Not because I was healed. I was nowhere near healed. But I had built a small events and hospitality business over the past 4 years, and it needed me even on the days I didn't need it back. I started showing up earlier and staying later. I hired a personal trainer and began working out 3 mornings a week, not to change how I looked, but because I needed to feel in control of something. I started reading again. Business books, legal texts, market reports. I enrolled in an online financial management course and finished it in 3 weeks instead of 6. I updated my wardrobe slowly, choosing clothes that made me feel like a woman who had somewhere important to be. I cut my hair. Not dramatically, just enough to feel like I was shedding something old. My friends noticed the shift before I did. They said I seemed sharper, more focused, calmer than they expected. The truth was that grief had nowhere to go once I poured it into work, so it transformed into something else entirely. Into drive. Into discipline. Into a version of myself that didn't need candlelit dinners or anyone else's approval to feel worthy. I was rebuilding quietly. The way strong things are always rebuilt slowly, from the inside out, one deliberate day at a time. By the 6th month after the breakup, things had shifted in real and measurable ways. I expanded my events center into a second property, a rooftop space I had been watching for over a year. I negotiated a fair lease, had it renovated, and made it operational within 10 weeks. My team grew from 4 staff members to 11. I brought in a full-time event planner named Yemi, who was sharp, thorough, and deeply loyal. She had worked with me on and off for 2 years before I made her permanent, and she understood my business almost as well as I did. I also launched a small catering subsidiary that handled corporate lunches and private dining events. It started modestly, but within 3 months it was generating steady income. My name began appearing in local business features. A regional magazine ran a profile on me, Young Women in Hospitality. I framed it, not out of vanity, but as a marker. A reminder of how far the road had taken me from that candlelit table where I sat alone with an empty ring finger and nothing but unanswered questions. I wasn't fully healed. There were still nights when the silence felt too loud. But I was building again. And building felt a lot like breathing. Like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me and that no one, not even heartbreak, could permanently take away. It was a Thursday evening when everything cracked open again. I had gone to my own restaurant, Deja, with 2 friends to unwind after a long week. Deja was my favorite space, warm lighting, good music, a menu I had helped design myself. We were seated near the back, close to the VIP corner I always kept for special bookings. I was mid-laugh at something my friend Adiz had said when I looked up and saw them. Jermaine was at the VIP table. Dressed well, the way he dressed when he wanted to impress. He was on one knee. Mirabelle was sitting across from him, hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He opened a small velvet box. I recognized it before I saw what was inside. My ring. My mother's ring. The one he had slid off my finger 7 months ago on the night I made his favorite meal. I watched him place it on Mirabelle's hand. I watched her say yes. I watched them hold each other while people nearby began to clap. And I sat there in my own restaurant, in the space I had built with my own hands and money, completely unable to move. The music kept playing. The room kept celebrating. My friends went completely still. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. I only know that at some point I stood up, walked past them without making a sound, and stepped out into the night air alone. I walked for a long time that night. No destination. No plan. Just movement, because standing still felt impossible. The streets were busy with evening energy, couples laughing, groups spilling out of restaurants, music from open windows above. I felt none of it. I felt like I was watching life play out behind thick glass. By the time I got home, my feet ached and my face was tight from dried tears I hadn't noticed falling. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to count the months. 7. 7 months since the breakup. And somewhere inside those 7 months, Mirabelle had been with him. She had been comforting me with one hand and building something with him with the other. She had held me while I cried over a man she was already in love with. Maybe had always been in love with. She had said all the right things, that I was worthy, that I would be okay, that whoever he chose wasn't worth my breath. And all along, that person was her. The breakup had broken my heart. This broke something deeper. Something I didn't have a clean word for yet. I lay back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't cry again. The tears had gone somewhere behind the eyes, somewhere quieter and colder. I just lay there in the dark and let myself feel the full, terrible weight of what I now understood. They had planned this. Both of them. Together, 0.3 days after I saw the proposal, Yemi knocked on my office door with an expression I had learned to read. It was the look she wore when she had information she wasn't sure how to deliver. Tight jaw, careful eyes, the folder held slightly too close to her chest. I told her to sit down and just say it. She placed the folder on my desk and opened it slowly. Jermaine had called the event center. Not Deja. Not the catering arm. My main venue. The original space that had my name on the lease. The one I had personally renovated room by room before any of my other properties existed. He had spoken to a junior booking coordinator who had no idea about the history between us. He described the event as a private wedding, 200 guests, black tie, with a date 6 months out. He had paid the initial deposit using a company account. Yemi had caught it during her routine booking review. She had not confirmed the booking. She had not rejected it either. She had brought it directly to me. I stared at the folder for a long moment without speaking. He hadn't just taken my ring. He hadn't just taken my best friend. He had now come to book my house, my actual space, to celebrate all of it. I closed the folder. I set it on the corner of my desk. And for the first time since the night of the proposal, I felt something other than grief. I felt clear. I went quiet after that. Deliberately. I stepped back from social events, declined several invitations, and kept my circle very small. Not out of pain this time, but out of intention. I needed to think carefully, and careful thinking requires silence. I started paying close attention to patterns. what Germain and Mirabelle were sharing publicly, which vendors and suppliers I recognized had been approached about their event. The hospitality world in our city is not large. People talk. A florist I had worked with for years mentioned, almost in passing, that someone had reached out about a large spring wedding order. She didn't name them. She didn't need to. I asked a few careful questions over the following week. A photographer I had sent referrals to confirmed he had been contacted. A linen rental company I used regularly said the same thing. They were building something real, and they were building it with people I knew, in spaces I understood, on a timeline I could see clearly. I didn't react. I didn't call anyone out. I didn't send a message or show up anywhere uninvited. I simply kept my eyes open and my mouth shut. Because sometimes the most powerful position in any situation is the one where you already know more than the other person believes you do. I was settling quietly into that position, without urgency, without noise, and without any rush at all. Yemi was the one who assembled the full picture. She had always been thorough, but over the following 2 weeks she went beyond thorough. She built a complete document: vendor names, contact details, deposit amounts, delivery timelines, color palette choices, catering briefs, seating preferences. She had cross-referenced every booking inquiry that came through our center or any supplier in our network against the confirmed wedding date. She sat across from me and walked through it page by page, her voice steady and professional, her loyalty made plain not through any speech but through the simple discipline of the work in front of us. By the time she finished, I knew almost everything. The florist, the DJ, the decorator, the photographer, the caterer, who notably was a subsidiary of my own catering company, booked through a junior account manager who had no idea about the connection. They had unknowingly hired me to cater their own wedding. I let that detail sit in my mind for a quiet moment. Then I picked up a pen and began writing notes in the margin of Yemi's document. Not from anger. Anger is loud and wasteful, and it makes you careless. What I felt was closer to the particular calm that comes when you realize that a situation you thought had no exit has, in fact, a door. And the key, you discover with a slow, steady breath, is already sitting in your hand. Over the next week, I mapped everything out completely. Not just in my head where things blur and shift, but on paper, then transferred into a secure digital folder only Yemi and I could access. Every vendor listed with their contract terms, cancellation clauses, deposit structures, and the name of the person who had made the booking. Every timeline charted against the wedding date. Every service, catering, florals, photography, decor, music, linen, lighting, accounted for and traced back to either my direct business interests or suppliers within my established network. The picture that emerged was more complete than I had expected. The venue mine. The catering, my subsidiary. The florist, a woman I had referred clients to for 3 years, who valued our relationship deeply. The linen supplier, a vendor I had helped through a difficult cash flow period the previous year by paying his invoices early, ahead of schedule. The decorator, a former employee of mine who had started her own business 18 months ago and who I had personally mentored through her first difficult year. They had, without realizing it, built their entire wedding inside my world. Every pillar of their celebration was connected to me in some way, through business, through loyalty, through money already exchanged and favors already given. I printed the full map and placed it inside a plain manila folder. Then I went home and slept better than I had in months. I began making quiet adjustments. Nothing dramatic. Nothing visible from the outside. Just small, careful shifts in how certain contracts were structured, who held signatory authority over key accounts, and which disbursements required my personal approval. The venue contract, originally filed under a generic company reference, was updated to reflect my direct personal ownership more explicitly. Yemi explained to the junior coordinator that it was a routine legal tidying, something our accountant had recommended during a compliance review. Nobody questioned it. The catering subsidiary received an internal memo about tightening client verification procedures for all new bookings, also routine, also quietly effective. I had a warm coffee meeting with the florist. We spoke about an upcoming project, about industry changes, about how much she appreciated the referrals I had consistently sent her way over the years. I mentioned gently that I like to stay personally informed about any large bookings involving clients connected to my professional circle. She understood without my having to explain further. The decorator, my former employee, called me about something unrelated, and before the conversation ended, she too understood in the quiet way that people who know you well understand things without needing every word spelled out. I wasn't pulling any strings yet. I was simply making sure every string led back to me, ready to be pulled when the moment was exactly right. I spent the next 2 weeks going through the financial trail carefully. What I found was not entirely surprising, but it was useful. Jermaine and I had shared an apartment for 2 years. During that time, I had covered the larger portion of our joint expenses, utilities, groceries, occasional home repairs, because my business was doing better and it had felt natural. I had also, on 3 separate occasions, lent him money directly. Not large amounts individually, but together they added up to a figure worth noting. I had never asked for it back. It hadn't seemed important at the time. Now I photographed every bank transfer record, every shared expense receipt I still had in my files, and organized them chronologically. I also identified that the deposit paid to my events center, the initial booking fee Jermaine had submitted, had come from a business account that I had strong reason to believe was partially capitalized using money I had transferred to him 18 months earlier as a professional loan. I wasn't going to make a public scene about any of this. That was never the plan. But having the financial documentation prepared gave me a kind of quiet confidence, the kind that comes not from planning to use a weapon, but simply from knowing that you have one available and that it is clean and ready. I filed everything neatly and said nothing. It started small enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. The decorator sent a message to Mirabelle explaining that there had been a minor delay with the fabric samples, supplier issue, completely routine. She was very sorry. The florist called to confirm the order but mentioned, almost apologetically, that one of the specialty bloom varieties they had requested might need to be substituted. Availability was unpredictable this time of year. The catering subsidiary sent a standard email noting that their booking confirmation would require updated payment details, as they had recently migrated to a new invoicing system. All true. All genuinely routine sounding. None of it alarming on its own. But together, for someone already managing the stress of wedding planning, it was the kind of friction that lodges in the back of your mind and begins to quietly hum. Yemi reported to me that Jermaine had called the events center directly to ask whether everything was on schedule. The junior coordinator had told him yes, of course, with a warm and professional smile. He had seemed satisfied but not entirely relaxed. Mirabelle, according to the florist, had followed up twice within the same week about the bloom substitution, far more urgently than the situation called for. Good. They were starting to feel the edges of something without knowing what it was or where it was coming from. That was exactly how I wanted it. Jermaine called my personal number on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing vendor invoices when his name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice, just enough to feel unhurried, then answered with a calm and ordinary hello. He asked how I was doing in the careful tone people use when they want information but don't want to reveal that they're looking for it. I said I was busy with work, the usual. Then he got to the point. He said he had booked a venue for an upcoming event and mentioned, without naming the event directly, that he hoped there wouldn't be any complications on the administrative side. I told him our center was always professionally managed and that any booking made through the proper channels would be handled with full care and attention to detail. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he appreciated that. I asked, pleasantly, if there was anything specific he was concerned about. He said no, everything was fine. Just checking in. I told him to have a good day. He hung up first. I set the phone down on my desk and looked at the wall for a moment. He was uneasy. He didn't know why. And the fact that his first instinct was to call me, not the coordinator, not Yemi, but me directly, told me that somewhere underneath all of it, he already knew on some level whose world he had stepped into. I did nothing for the next 3 weeks. Deliberately, completely nothing. No calls. No adjustments. No new memos or quiet conversations with vendors. I let everything sit exactly where it was and I focused entirely on my other work. I attended 2 industry networking events. I finalized the rooftop venue's first major corporate booking. I had lunch with my accountant and reviewed our quarterly figures, which were the strongest we had recorded since the business launched. I went to the gym every morning. I slept full nights. I cooked for myself on weekends and ate slowly, without distraction, which is something I had stopped doing during the harder months after the breakup. I allowed myself to feel, in a real and grounded way, how much my life had grown since Jermaine walked out of it. The business was stronger. My body was stronger. My thinking was clearer. The life I had built in the absence of what I thought I needed had turned out to be more solid, more mine, than anything I had shared with him. That period of stillness was not wasted. It was intentional. Sometimes the most unsettling thing you can do to someone who is waiting for you to react is simply to not react at all. Let the silence do the work. Let their own anxiety fill the space. I was patient. The date was still weeks away. I had time. Jermaine moved out of our shared apartment on a quiet Saturday in early spring. I knew because a neighbor mentioned it to me in passing. She hadn't realized the full story and brought it up the way people mention neutral news. He had apparently arranged for a small moving truck and taken his things in a single morning while I was at the gym. I hadn't been living there myself for several months. I had moved into a smaller place closer to my main venue not long after the breakup to make the commute easier. But I still held the lease on the old apartment, technically, for another 2 months. He had been staying there with my full knowledge, a quiet arrangement that had never been formally acknowledged between us. Now he had vacated it, which meant that thread was cleanly severed. I arranged for the apartment to be professionally cleaned and photographed for a new tenant. Within a week, I had a signed lease with a young couple starting in the following month. Another loose end resolved. Another space reclaimed. I updated my personal legal documents that week too, removed his name from any joint record that remained, however minor. My solicitor processed it all without comment. By the end of that week, there was no remaining administrative connection between us. Financially, legally, logistically, I was fully separate. I was standing on entirely my own ground, and it felt remarkably clean. With 4 weeks left before the wedding date, I met with Yemi for a final review. We sat in my office with the door closed, the full vendor map spread across the desk between us. She walked me through every contract, every timeline, every access code and confirmation number. The venue, fully in my name, with a clause I had quietly amended to require my written approval for any event to proceed. The catering contract, now routed through my direct sign-off rather than the subsidiary manager. The florist, she had formally confirmed in a brief email exchange with Yemi that she would defer to my instructions regarding the booking. The linen supplier, same confirmation. The decorator, same. The photographer was the one outside my direct network, but Yemi had spoken with him professionally and he had made it clear, without being asked directly, that he valued the referral pipeline I represented far more than any single booking. Every major element of the wedding was, contractually and practically, under my authority. Not because I had done anything deceptive. Every adjustment had been legitimate. Every conversation had been professional. Every contract update had been within my rights as the venue owner and business operator. I had simply ensured that the world they were celebrating inside was, from foundation to ceiling, mine. I closed the folder. I told Yemi she had done outstanding work. She smiled and said she already knew. 1 week before the wedding, everything began to move. The florist sent a formal notice to Mirabelle explaining that, due to a contractual review triggered by the venue ownership, she was unable to fulfill the order without written clearance from the property holder, meaning me. The linen supplier sent a similar message, citing updated terms in their venue partnership agreement. The catering subsidiary sent an email to the contact email on the booking, Jermaine's, stating that a billing irregularity had been flagged and that all services were on administrative hold pending resolution. The decorator sent a message saying access to the venue for setup could not be confirmed until a sign-off from the event center's director had been received. That director was me. I received all of the frantic replies within hours. Jermaine called the event center 3 times in a single afternoon. The coordinator, professionally and calmly, told him that the director was aware of the situation and would be in contact shortly. Mirabelle messaged the florist in what Yemi described, after the florist forwarded it, as barely controlled panic. Within 48 hours, their carefully constructed wedding had gone from a finished plan to a question with no clear answer. And they still didn't fully understand why. or who was behind it. The chaos was real. The confusion was real. And I had caused none of it through cruelty, only through ownership. Everything I had done was simply mine to do. Mirabelle called me on a Wednesday evening, 6 days before the wedding. I was in my kitchen making tea when the phone rang. I looked at her name for a long moment before I answered. Her voice, when she spoke, was unsteady. She said she was sorry to bother me. She said she knew this was strange. She said she didn't know who else to call. She was crying before she finished the second sentence. The kind of crying that isn't performed, the kind that comes from somewhere real and desperate. She said there were problems with the vendors. She said everything seemed to be falling apart at once and she couldn't understand why. I let her talk for a while. Then, when the silence opened up, I asked her one question. I asked it quietly and without anger. Mirabelle, I said. How long? There was a long pause. She knew exactly what I meant. She didn't try to pretend otherwise. She said 9 months. 9 months before Jermaine ended things with me. They had already begun. She was crying harder now. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once, in different ways, as though repeating it might make it land differently. I listened. I said nothing for a long time. Then I told her I appreciated her honesty. I told her I would be in touch. And I ended the call, set the phone face down on the counter, and finished making my tea. My hands were completely steadied. I sat with what Mirabelle had told me for the rest of that evening. 9 months. Which meant the affair had begun 4 months into my engagement. It meant that while I was planning a future with Jermaine, sending save the dates in my head, imagining a home and a life, they were already a secret together. It meant that every time Mirabelle held me while I cried, every supportive message, every late night on my couch, she had known. She had chosen. And she had kept choosing over and over, right up until she said yes to a ring that belonged to my mother. I let myself feel all of it that night. I didn't push it down or dress it up into something more manageable. I sat in it fully. The grief, the betrayal, the particular specific pain of discovering that 2 of the people you trusted most had been building a lie inside the space of your trust. I felt it clearly and completely. And then once I had felt it, I set it aside. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered enormously. But I had work to do. The following day I called Yemi and told her to arrange a meeting. A formal sit-down. Vendors present. The events center boardroom. 2 days before the wedding date. I told her to invite Jermaine and Mirabelle and to frame it as a routine final coordination meeting. I told her to invite Jermaine and Mirabelle and to frame it as a routine final coordination meeting. I told her to make it sound like good news. She did exactly that. They arrived on time, which surprised me slightly. Jermaine was dressed in a dark jacket and looked like a man trying very hard to appear composed. Mirabelle walked beside him in a pale blouse, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't look at me immediately when they entered the boardroom. The room was arranged formally. A long table, water glasses, printed agendas at each seat. Yemi had done it beautifully. The vendors were already seated. The florist, the linen supplier, the catering manager, and the decorator, 4 people who between them held the logistical keys to the entire celebration. There was also a representative from our legal team, seated quietly at the far end. I was not in the room when they entered. I had asked Yemi to seat everyone first. I waited 3 minutes. Then I walked in through the side door, set my folder on the table at the head of the room, and sat down. Mirabelle looked up when I entered. The color left her face almost immediately. Jermaine's jaw tightened. He looked from me to the vendors and then back to me, and I watched his mind begin to work through what was happening. The familiar faces, the formal setting, my presence at the head of the table, and I watched the first full understanding of the situation begin to register in his eyes. I opened my folder. I did not rush. I took a slow breath, and then I began. For a long moment after I sat down, no one spoke. The room held its breath. Jermaine was looking at me the way a person looks at something they recognize but cannot immediately name, like a face from a distant memory surfacing too fast. Mirabelle's hands were flat on the table in front of her, and she was very still in the way that people become still when they are trying not to show that they are afraid. The vendors were composed. They had been briefed professionally by Yemi, not with the full personal history, but enough to understand the structure of authority in the room. They knew who held the contracts. They knew whose approval governed the outcome of this meeting. The legal representative at the end of the table made a small note in his pad. I poured water into my glass slowly and set the pitcher back down. Outside the boardroom windows, the city went about its ordinary afternoon. Cars moving, people walking, life continuing at its usual pace, completely unbothered by what was unfolding inside this room. I thought briefly about the night I sat in the candlelight alone after Jermaine left. I thought about the night I watched him propose with my ring in my own restaurant. I thought about Mirabelle's voice on the phone saying 9 months. And then I set all of that aside, the way you set down something heavy before lifting something that requires both hands, and I looked at them both calmly and clearly. I opened the folder in front of me and addressed the room. I started with the vendors, thanking each of them professionally for their presence and for the quality of work they had brought to the planning process. Then I turned to Jermaine and Mirabelle directly. I told them I had a few things to clarify. I spoke clearly, without raising my voice, and without unnecessary drama. I said, "This event center belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. The catering company listed on your booking is my subsidiary. The florist, the linen supplier, and the decorator at this table have all confirmed that their primary business relationship is with me and that any service delivery for this event requires my direct authorization." I paused. That authorization will not be given. The florist confirmed. The linen supplier confirmed. The decorator nodded. The catering manager said quietly that all services were on hold. Jermaine opened his mouth. I continued before he could speak. "You booked my house for a wedding built on a 9-month lie. You used my ring. You used my resources. You did not ask and you did not disclose. The wedding will not take place here. The vendors at this table are unable to serve this event. Access to this venue is denied, effective now, 2 days before the date." The room was absolutely silent. Mirabelle looked at the table. Jermaine looked at me. I closed the folder and said, "That is all." I stood, nodded to Yemi, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. They scrambled. Word reached me through various channels over the following 48 hours, and the picture that assembled itself was not a flattering one. They had called 4 venues in the city within hours of the meeting. 3 were fully booked. 1 had a cancellation available but could only accommodate 80 guests, less than half their planned list. They took it anyway because there was nothing else to take. The vendors they reached out to as last-minute replacements were either unavailable or, in the hospitality network where my name carried weight, quietly disinclined to step in on short notice for a booking that smelled like complications. They ended up with a DJ who usually did corporate office parties and a catering outfit that primarily served canteen lunches. The flowers were grocery store bouquets arranged by a well-meaning cousin. The photographer didn't arrive until after the ceremony because he had another booking that morning. Guests who had been expecting a black-tie dinner at a premium venue arrived to find round plastic tables with white paper covers and a buffet that ran out before the speeches ended. I heard about the speeches too. Jermaine's best man made a joke that didn't land. Someone's grandmother fell asleep in the corner before the cake was cut. The cake itself, ordered in haste from a supermarket bakery, listed their names incorrectly. Mirabelle cried during the reception, not the happy kind. It was, by all accounts, a disaster. Every detail of it, a perfectly natural consequence. 6 months later, I was standing on the rooftop of my second venue on a clear evening, watching the setup crew arrange tables for a private corporate gala we were hosting the following night. String lights had been strung across the open terrace. The city spread out beneath us, lit and moving, indifferent and beautiful. Yemi came up behind me with a tablet and 2 things to sign, a new vendor partnership and an extended lease renewal on my original property, now fully in my name with no complications, no shared history, and no asterisks. I signed both. She took the tablet back with a small smile and went to brief the setup crew. I stayed on the terrace for a while after she left, just looking out at everything I had built. My business, my properties, my team, my name in the industry, growing steadily, earned through work that asked nothing of anyone but my own effort. I thought about Jermaine once, not with anger, not with longing, but with the clear and settled recognition of someone looking back at a road they're glad they no longer have to walk. He had proposed to Mirabelle in my restaurant with my ring using money that had passed through my hands. He had tried to celebrate that inside my walls. And in the end, I was still here. Still building. Still mine. I always had been. He just hadn't been paying close enough attention to notice.